So this is what we're still doing, right? We're looking at the order in which the Kohen Gadol did the Avodah on Yom HaKippurim. And to that end, we did part of the sugya here on Daf Ayin in the Gemara and Yoma, and we got up to this part here. So I'm just going to remind us from this little part here. Here the Gemara, this is on Daf Ayin Amud Aleph. The Gemara quotes the Mishnah. It says Kidesh Yadav V'Raglav. And that's referring to the Mishnah up here that we started this whole sugya with, where we had the machloket between Rabbi Yoyas and Rabbi Akiva, which kicked off this whole discussion about the order of things that are being done. And I will remind us of this order in a moment, but just to find our place in the Mishnah, we had the machloket between Rabbi Yoyas and Rabbi Akiva about some of the korbanot that are done by the Kohen Gadol in Yom Kippurim. And then after that machloket, the Gemara continued, the Mishnah continued. It said, Kidesh Yadav Raglav, Upashat V'Yirad B'Taval V'Yalav V'Nistapeg, Hevi Lo Bigdei Lavan V'Lavash, right? So after he did that, whatever that was, Bein Rabbi Akiva, Bein Rabbi Eliezer, then he had to go and once again change his clothes and go to the mikvah and wash his hands and legs before and after. And then Hevi Lo Bigdei Lavan V'Lavash, and then they would bring him the Bigdei Lavan, and he would put the Bigdei Lavan on for the second and the last time. Then it says, right? Nichnas l'tzir takafia tamachten. So putting on the Bigdei Lavan for the second time, the purpose of that was to go back into the Kodesh HaKodeshim and remove the kaf and the machteh that he had brought in earlier with the Ktoret into the Kodesh HaKodeshim. And that's all that the Mishnah devotes to that, right? That he changes, he washes, and he goes in, and then right after that it says Kidesh Yadav Ragav, and he washes and tumbles again, and then they bring him the Bigdei Zahav, and he finishes off Avodah, the Avodah for the day, not necessarily the Avodah that's particular to Yom Kippur. So in this sugya, yes.
Where did he put down this kaf and the machta in the Kodesh HaKodeshim? There is no table, no mizbeach, or there is maybe the Aron HaKodesh, maybe at that time it wasn't anymore there, but there was no place. The only way is to put it on the floor.
Well, we learned earlier that he put it Bein Habadim.
Bein Habadim.
Yes, but
on the floor. Yes, it's not very mechubad to put it on the floor.
I think that's an interesting question. But the other thing I want to say about that is that's a topic that I want to revisit. And it's it's one of the sugyot that I want to look at after we finish Perek Shvi'i, and I said there are a couple of things I want to come back to. Very specifically, what I want to come back to is to make a diagram of Kodesh HaKodeshim and exactly where he would have put down the kaf machteh, and also exactly where he would have stood and how he would have thrown the blood. which we discussed at the time, but I think it's worth going into a little bit of detail to give us a better picture. So that's a completely relevant question. The quick answer is that it was Bein Abadim, but exactly where it was Bein Abadim, we will revisit that. So he goes in now and he's going to take it out. It doesn't say what he does with it when he takes it out, but presumably, those kelim will go back to their place, right? There was the lishka for the kelim. Okay, so that's not his job. His job is to remove it from the Kodesh HaKodeshim, and we still have that as kind of a topic of interest, that the only avodah that he's doing now that he's changed clothes into the Bigdei Lavan for the second and last time, we could still ponder why this is considered to be an avodah, and B, an avodah that's completely separate from the other avodot that he did in Kodesh HaKodeshim. And in a sense, that's at the heart of this issue of how many Tvilot he did and the order of the psukim, which is actually the topic that we're going to look at today in a little bit more detail. What happened was in our learning, so we got up to this, when we're doing this sugya that began on Ayin Amud Aleph, but by now we're on Ayin Amud Bet, and in my rendering, it's over here. Just had it right in my layout. I have it over here. So the Gemara quotes this Mishnah that we just looked at. Kidesh Yadav V'Raglav. This is what we just looked at, when he washes and starts the process to change into the Bigdei Lavan. So on this, the Gemara brings this Braita, Tanura Banan, Uva Aharon El Ohel Moed. So they quote the pasuk from Acharei Mot that Aaron comes into the Ohel Moed, and of course that whole pasuk, which we've seen now many times, but let's just remind ourselves. It says Uva Aaron El Moed, Ufashat et Bigdei Habad Asher Lavash Bivo'o El HaKodesh V'Hinicham Sham. Right, Aaron comes into the Ohel Moed. He removes the linen clothing that he was wearing when he came into the Kodesh, and he leaves them there. Now, as we said many times, Chazal understands that he's coming into the Kodesh HaKodeshim to remove the Kafu Machteh, even though this is not Meforash. We'll see some Perush on that later. But it goes, this whole pasuk seems to go against the way Chazal understood it, or the other way around. Chazal seemed to understand this pasuk very differently than the Pshat, right? Because it says he goes into the Kodesh, he removes his clothes in the Kodesh and leaves them there, right? We've mentioned this from the very beginning, right? It's a very, very difficult pasuk. And in Pshuto Shel Mikra, okay, let's say we had nothing, we didn't have Chazal, okay, but we would want to know what's the meaning of this? Why would he go into the Kodesh and strip in the holiest place that we know? It doesn't even say that how does that work? He strips down, he's completely naked in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, and how does he get out? And but if you take it in Pshat, that's exactly what's happening. He leaves them there, and then in Pasuk Kaftan it says, he would go to Makom Kadosh, which apparently is not in even a Pshat. It's not the same thing as Bevoa HaKodesh. El HaKodesh is one place, and a Makom Kadosh is a different place. he would go to a makom kadosh and put on his clothes. Presumably, in this pasuk, the clothes, of course, are not going to be the bigdei lavan. They would be the bigdei zahav, because those are his clothes in the sense that those are his clothes during the rest of the year. And then v'yatzavi asat olato v'yat olata'am v'chiper ba'ado v'ad ha'am. Right? So then he would go and do his olah, the olata'am, which is the ayil of the kohen and the ayil of the people. So that's pshuto shemikra. But Chazal understand that what it means is he goes in to remove the kafu machten. So we have a lot of questions about this, but for the moment, let's see this sugya. So the sugya that we're looking at, it quotes the Mishnah Kidei Shedav Ragav Tanu Rabbanan Ba'aron El Olam Moed Lama Hu Ba. Why does he come? Otzi et hakafi at hamachteh. He comes to take out the kafu machteh. Shekol parasha kula nemra al seder chutz mipasuk zeh. Because the entire parsha is said in order except for this pasuk. So there are two things that are going on in this braita. So one thing is the braita is telling us the purpose of the Kohen Gadol going into the Kodesh HaKodeshim for the second time, which is not mefurash in the pasuk, as we just discussed. The Torah doesn't say that he's going in to take the kafu machteh. Chazal ask it as a question, why is he going in? So the way this braita is phrased, lama hu ba, it implies that the way Chazal were reading the psukim, even in pshat, it's not clear why should he go in at all. In other words, the idea that if you take the pshat and he goes in and he strips down and he leaves the clothes there, that as we said, the tamua, in other words, that doesn't seem to be an avodah at all. There would be no purpose in doing that. So he must be going in for some other purpose. So they say he's going in to remove the kaf and the machteh, and we'll see in the Ramban. I think I said that we'll look at the Ramban today on the pasuk. We'll see how the Ramban, among others, understands that in the context of the pshat, like how do they come to this conclusion? But then that's one thing, right? So the one thing is, why is he going in there? Okay, he's going in there to remove the kafu machteh. But then it says a second thing. Shekola parasha kula nemra al haseder chutz mipasuk zeh. That the entire thing is said al haseder except for this pasuk. So this is another issue. It's a second issue. That this pasuk is now, according to Chazal, was said not in order, not in the order that it was actually done. So there the Gemara says, "My ta'ama." What's the reason? Meaning, what's the reason for the braita that says that this pasuk is being said out of order? How does the braita know? Amarav Chisda Gemire Chamesh Tevilot v'Asara Kiddushin Tovel Kohen Gadol Mekadesh Bo Bayom. So Chisda says there's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. There's a tradition that goes back all the way that says on Yom Kippur that the Kohen Gadol has to do Chamesh Tevilot v'Asara Kiddushin. V'amart Kesidran Ketivei. If you say that the psukim are written in order, lo mashkachat la ela shalosh tevilot v'shisha kiddushin. If I read the psukim in order, then I'll find that I only have 3 tevilot and 6 kiddushin. So Rav Chisda's answer to this question, like how does the Braita know? In other words, how do Chazal collectively understand that this pasuk of Hotzat Kafu Machteh of Ba'aron El Kodesh, Ba'aron El Moed, how do they know that it's out of order? How could they say such a thing, that the Torah is written out of order? Now, I will add parenthetically that the idea that the Torah is out of chronological order, you might argue, is not a radical idea, right? Because the Torah in more than one place tells us that it's out of chronological order, right? So, for example, in the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar begins in the beginning of the second year. But if you go in just a few prakim in, it goes back a year, right? It goes out of order. But there the difference is it tells us the dates. The Torah in Bamidbar tells us the dates. You may know, or maybe we've brought it up in this shiur sometime in the past, or you might have learned on your own. There's a major machloket rishonim about Parshat Yitro. At the beginning of Parshat Yitro, did Yitro visit Moshe before Matan Torah or after Matan Torah? And here we get into a machloket between the Ibn Ezra and the Ramban. The Ramban generally holds that the Torah is written in order, except when the Torah goes out of its way to tell us otherwise. And that's how we understand Zain Mukdam Umuchar, the Torah, right? The Torah doesn't have an earlier and a later, meaning it's written out of order, but only when it's specified. And the Ibn Ezra holds it's not necessarily specified, but we can understand it from context. So that's all. This is all parenthetical because I'll put all of that to one side, and I'll say this particular instance is quite exceptional, no matter how you hold, even if you hold Ein Mukdam U'Muchar b'Torah, but all the examples that I brought until now are really about whole parashot that are in the Torah. Here, it's within the same parsha. So here, Chazal are saying that this pasuk is out of order within the parsha. So it's quite a radical departure from anything that we've seen in terms of how Chazal understood the order of the Torah. And the basis for them doing it, at least at this moment, what we see, the basis for them saying that is because they have a tradition that there has to be 5 tevilot in Asarat and 10 kiddushin. So what I said last time is that this sugya, this part of the sugya appears earlier in the Gemara, and Rashi here on Daf Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph refers us back to that. He says, I explained this earlier. So I did prepare that part of the sugya from earlier. And you could find this on Lamed Bet Amud Aleph. The context there, the context for the Gemara bringing this question that we just saw earlier in the Gemara is because it's related to the question that's brought up in the Mishnah, that first gets brought up in the Mishnah about doing the Kiddushin and the Tevilot. So I'm just going to remind us quickly, I don't want to get too far, I don't want us to lose our focus, but just to remind us quickly, we had this Mishnah from Perek Shlishi. This is the beginning of the Seder HaAvodah. It says, Pashat, this is the Mishnah, it says, Pashat Yarad V'Taval Alav Mispapeg. He strips, he goes down, he immerses, he comes up, he dries off. They bring him the Bigdei Zahav and he gets dressed, and then he washes his hands and legs. Right? So this is the first time that he's going to wear the Bigdei Zahav. And what we see is he does a Tevilah and he does one Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. He doesn't do a Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim before he puts on the Bigdei Zahav, only after. And then this is one of the issues that comes up now in the Gemara, because the Gemara knows that he has to do 10 Kiddushin. He's going to do these 5 Tevilot and 5 clothing changes. So the question is, where is he going to get the 10th Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim? We might have thought that he begins with 1 in order to, right, so that before and after each time he puts on clothes, he would do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. But here, the very first time he puts on the Bigdei Zahav, he doesn't do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim before, only after, right? So that's a question in the Gemara. And then the Gemara tells us what he does, and it brings us just the very faintest outline of what he's doing for the Avodat Hayom, for the Avodah of the Tamid. They bring him the Tamid, Kratzo, he shechts it. Kratzo, the idea is that he shechts it partially. Right, so he shechted Rov Kanev Veshet. This is what we learned way back when we were learning Perek Shlishi. And Mereka Shlita al Yado, and another Kohen is there, and he finishes off the Shlita. And Kibelat Adam Mizrako, that he does the Zrikat Adam. He goes in to be Maktir Ktoret Shel Shachar, Lativet Neirot, Makrivet Arosh Vet Evarim, Chavitin Vet Yayin, etc. And so this much we knew, that he started off the day by doing the Korban Tamid and the Ktoret and the Neirot. We didn't see here anything about whether or not he does any part of the Musaf, and that's something that gets kicked later on. That was the Mishnah that we're on in Perek Shvi'i, that has to do with the machoket between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. When did he do the Musaf? But here in the Mishnah, this is what it had. So the first order of business in the Gemara here is to discuss this question of of whether this Mishnah goes only like the Rabbanan or also like Rabbi Meir, because we remember there is a machloket between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim in the next, a little bit further on, about when he does the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim Lifnei HaLabisha, right? So that's not precise. I was thinking we should go through that whole thing, but I don't want to, again, I just want to remind us of this issue, and I want to get into it right now. And in that context, the Gemara is talking about this issue of Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. And so it comes up to this Braita. So this Braita is the Braita that we just saw on Daf Ayin, or Daf Ayin Aleph. It's brought here first. It says, Tanura Bananu Varon El Ohel Moed, Lama Hu Ba. Why does he come to the Ohel Moed? Eino ba elo hotzi et hakafi et hamachteh. Right, so this is the Braita we just saw. He only comes now to remove the kaf and the machteh. The kol haparasha kula nemra al haseder chutz mi pasuk zeh. The entire parsha is set in order except for this pasuk. So now let's see how Rashi explains it here. So Rashi says here, Varon el moed ne'amar achar shegamar haktara u'matan damim har v'seir. Rashi says this pasuk of Varon el moed, this is said after he has finished the haktara, meaning the original haktarat haktaret in the Kodesh HaKodashim, u'matan damim par v'seir, and right, the sprinkling of the blood from the par chatat and the sir chatat. It's those avodot that he's doing specifically on Yom Kippur, the Kodesh HaKodashim, and then in the Kodesh. So this pasuk mama hu ba. So Varon el moed, Aaron, comes into the Omoed Lama Huba. Why does he come? Rashi says, El HaHechal. Why is he going into the Hechal? Hare Gamar Avodotav. He's already finished his service, the services that he had to do inside the Hechal and inside the Kodesh HaKodeshim. Af b'mikra zeh lo piresh ma yaseh l'sham. Even in this pasuk, it doesn't say what he is supposed to do there. So the Mishnah, the Braita answers, he's only coming to remove the kaf machteh, shehiniach bein habadim, that he set down between the two staffs of the Aron Kodesh, k'dichtiv v'natan tektorat al ha'esh. Rashi saying, right, that's the proof text for where he put down the kaf machteh. It says that he places the ktoret al ha'esh v'chulei, that he placed it there, bein habadim. And then the Braita goes on to say, Shekol ha'parasha kula nemra ha'seder, etc. Rashi says, Shekol ha'parasha nemru ha'mikraot al seder ha'avodot ha'mitchalfot k'sidran b'parasha. This parsha, all of the psukim are said in the order of the various services, or the services that are the successive services, we could translate the successive services in order in the parsha. Kach seder avodatam. That was in fact the order of their actual service. Chutz mimikra zeh, except for particular pasuk shekatav hotzat kaf u'machteh im avodot ha'pnimiyot, that it writes about removing the kaf u'machteh along with the avodot that he did inside the Heichal, inside the Kodesh HaKodeshim. V'lo hifsik avodat elo ve'el ha'am benatayim. And it doesn't interrupt between the avodot ha'pnimiyot, what we've called elsewhere avodat hayom, the sprinkling of the blood inside. It doesn't interrupt by telling us about how he had to be makriv elo ve'el ha'am in the meantime. It should have written to begin with, v'yatsa v'yasa et olato. In other words, that's the pasuk that tells me that he goes and does his ayil and the ayil ha'am. And then afterwards, it should have said that Aaron goes in to remove the kaf u'machteh. Afterwards, it could have said then he removes his clothes and leaves them there. And then it would say and after that it would say that he washes his flesh. In other words, he goes and tumbles and puts on his clothing, and all those are quotes from pasuk. But it goes v'lavashe begadav shmone. He puts on his begadim, his 8 begadim, shel kol hashana, that he puts on for the rest of the year. Yasaha musafim v'tamid shel ben ha'arbaim, and then he would do musaf and tamid shel ben ha'arbaim. So just to show you in the psukim, this is also easier to follow if you're looking at the psukim. So what Rashi is saying, it should have gone like this. I do want to point out, all right, let's just stick for a moment with Rashi. So again, when you read Parshat Acharei Mot, beginning, essentially from the beginning of the Parsha, it tells us the avodah that's particular to Yoma Kippurim, particularly the avodah that he has to do lifnai v'lifnim. So it starts off and it tells us what are the korbanot that he has to bring, and he has to bring for him and the kohanim, and he has to wear special clothes. He has to bring special korbanot for Bnei Yisrael, and then he has to do a vidui. He has to figure out. He has to do the goralot to determine which of the seirim that he brought is going to be l'chatat and which is l'azazel, etc. And then we have all the psukim that describe the slaughtering of the parchatat and sprinkling of the blood, the slaughtering of the sir chatat and the sprinkling of the blood. Excuse me. Yeah, actually, I skipped over one other thing, right? That also that he's going, before he starts to sprinkle the blood, he's going to bring in the ketoret into the Kodesh HaKodashim. Then he's going to get the blood. He's going to sprinkle the blood of the par. He'll go out and he'll shach the seir. He'll sprinkle the blood from the seir. He'll do it also in the Kodesh. He'll do that in the Kodesh HaKodashim. Then he does it neged haparochet. Then he does it on the Mizbeach. And after that, he's going to send off the Sir LaAzazel, right? So when he finishes all of those avodot, that's when we come to Pasuk Kav Gimel. It says, Uvaron el Moed, right? So this key Pasuk that we're focusing in on now, he comes into the El Moed and he removes his clothes and leaves them there. So what Rashi is explaining to us is, what does it mean that this pasuk is out of order? So this pasuk Kav Gimel, Va'aron el Moed, I should have written that what it's saying is that before that pasuk, it should have said pasuk Kav Daled. It should have said, after he did all these other avodot pnimiyot, it should have said pasuk Kav Daled, V'rachatzet b'soro b'mayim b'makom kadosh. He should have gone in Zavud, v'levashet b'gadav, and he should have put on his regular golden clothes, right? The shmona b'gadim b'gdei zahav. Yatsav yasat olotov et olata'am. And it should have said that that's when he did the ayil and the el ha'am. And then after pasuk Kaf Daled, it should have said pasuk Kaf Gimel. After that, it should have said, then he goes into the Ol Moed, Uvashet Bigdei Habad, and etc. Right, and that's what this pasuk Kaf Gimel is. What we're saying means Hotzat Kafu Machteh, that he goes in to remove the Kafu Machteh. So this pasuk is out of order. It should have really come after pasuk Chaf Dalet. Instead, it comes before. So that's the Rashi that we just read now. And if you look through it, those are the psukim that he's quoting. Hayalo lichtov batchila v'yatsa v'yasat olato. That's pasuk Chaf Dalet. V'char kachu ba'aron. That's pasuk Kav Gimel. Then v'achar kachu b'shadet bigdei haba v'nichim sham. That's the hemshech of pasuk Kav Gimel. V'rachatzet b'soro b'mayim v'lavashet b'gadav shmona shekol hashana. Actually, Rashi should be a little more medayek. Rashi goes into greater detail than I just re-explained. Rashi says it should have started off not from the beginning of pasuk Kaf Daled. It should have started off from the middle of pasuk Kaf Daled. In other words, after he did all the avodot pnimiyot, then it should have started from the middle of pasuk Kaf Daled to say that he does the ayil and the ayil ha'am and the ayil ha'kohen, not necessarily in that order. Then it should have said the beginning of pasuk Kaf Gimel, and then it would have gone into the beginning of pasuk Kaf Daled. Okay, I'm not going to test you on that, but you get the idea. This is the according to Rashi, this is how the order should have been. This is how he understands the Gemara. So let's continue a little bit further in the Gemara. So we saw this part of the Gemara that we're going to look at now. We saw it on Daf Ayin Aleph, but here we're going to see it now with Rashi's Perush. So the Gemara says, "My Tama." What is the reason for the Braita to come to the conclusion that this pasuk was not written in order? How does the Braita know that this pasuk was not written in order? Amar Rav Chisda, Gemire chamesh tevilot v'asara kiddushin tovel kohen gadol mekadesh bo bayom. So Braita knows that there is a tradition that the Kohen Gadol on that day has to do 5 tevilot and 10 kiddushin. And Ikasidron, if he does them in order, lo mashkachad lahu ela shalosh tevilot v'shisha kiddushin. We would find that he would only be doing 3 tevilot and 6 kiddushin. So I explained this last time, but let's see Rashi, how Rashi says this. So my ta'ama, what is the reason? Rashi understands the question beat. So my ta'ama tzarich lafsik ve'elo ve'el ha'am ben avodat hayom hotzad kaf u'machten. What is the reason? Rashi phrases the question a little differently than I did. I said, what's the reason that, that the Braita tells us that the pasuk was written out of order? Rashi says it a little differently. He says, what is the reason that we have to interrupt the prior psukim with, or the previous pasuk with, bringing the ayil and the el ha'am between avodat hayom, right, which is the avodah of the par v'sir chatat and the sprinkling of the blood. Lohotzat kafu machteh. Why does the Braita insist that we have to put the bringing of the ayah, the elim, in between the avodat hayom and the removal of the kafu machteh? So Amar Rav Chisda Gemire halacha l'Moshe miSinai. We learn by halacha l'Moshe miSinai that chamesh tevilot bo bayom, that there were 5 tevilot and asara kiddushin on that day. The kasidran shel avodot ktiv mikra zeh. If we go according to the order of the avodot that are written in these psukim, lo mashkachet bahem ela shalosh tevilot, I would find that there were only 3 tevilot. And what would those be? Achad l'tamid shel shachar, v'achad beino uvein avodat hayom kula im hotzat kaf machteh, v'achad bein hotzat kaf machteh le'elo ve'el ha'am v'imahen ha'musafim v'tamid shel bein ha'arbayim. So this is what we explained last time, that looks like I only have Paul. Wait a second. Michael's still here? Oh no, Michael's still here. Sorry, okay. This is what we explained last time, right? If you read Parshat Acharei Mot doesn't say anything about the Korban Tamid, right? But I know that I have to bring it doesn't say anything about the Korban Tamid, it doesn't say anything about the Korban Musaf, but I know I have to bring those things because I learned it elsewhere in Parshat Pinchas. So the assumption is, when I come into the avodot that are mentioned in Acharei Mot, of course he's going to first do the Korban Tamid. That's for sure, right? Because I learned that has to always be the first thing. Then he would do all these other avodot, these avodot penimiyot. He would do all of those avodot that he has to do lifnai v'lifnim. And that would bring us all the way up to Pasuk of Gimel, which is Ubaron El Moed, the Upashat Bigdei Habad, which Chazal say is the end of that, would be the end of those avodot, and the removal by, which is marked by the removal of the kaf and the machteh. And then I come to Pasuk Kaf Daled, which tells me that he's going to change clothes and he's going to bring the Elim. And then presumably after that he'll finish the rest of the avodah of the musafin and the tamid shel ben ha'arbaim. So we do the math. He came in before Acharei Mot. He would come in. He would do a tvilah and shnei kiddushin bo nagid, and puts on the bigdei zahav. He does korban tamid. Then he would do the avodot that are listed in that, here in Acharei Mot, that the Torah tells us he does in the Bigdei Lavan, right? So it means that he would do a second tvilah. He would put on the Bigdei Lavan. He would do all the avodot of the Parvasir Chatat, etc., and also send off the Sir La'azazel. And then he would go into the Kodesh HaKodeshim to remove the Kaf U'Machteh, and then Pasuk Kaf Daled tells us, right? Pasuk Kaf Daled tells us that he changes his clothes. Kaf Daled says, "V'rachatze b'sor b'mayim b'makom kadosh v'avashet b'gadav." Right. So what bigadim is going to be wearing? He's going to change from the Bigdei Lavan, which, according to the previous pasuk, he left them inside the Beit HaMikdash. And now he would be putting on Bigdei Zahav and doing the Elim. So what would it be? He would have gone to the mikveh 3 times, because he would have changed his clothes 3 times, if we count the first time, right? The first time he changes his clothes from whatever his Bigdei Chol were, he puts on the Bigdei Zahav, does the Tamid, changes them again, puts on the Bigdei Lavan, does all of the Avodot Hayom, changes the, including up to and including removing the Kaf U'Machteh. Then he changes them again, puts on the Bigdei Zahav, and he finishes the Elim and the rest of anything that wasn't yet, that's hanging over from Avodat Hayom, and does the Tamid Shel Ben Arbaim, Musafin, etc. So those would be the 3 Tevilot and the 6 Kiddushin. So that's what Rav Chisda is saying, and that's what Rashi explains. If he was going in order according to the psukim, the way we see them in Acharei Mot, there would only be 3 tefillot. Achat l'tamid shel shachar, which is implied. It's not in Acharei Mot, but we know it from Parshat Pinchas that it has to be the first thing. Then that would be the first tefillah and the first 2 kiddushin, because we put on the Bigdei Zahav. Ve'echad beino bein avodat hayom kula im hotzat kaf u'machteh. And then he would do another tefillah, another shnei kiddushin, and do all of the avodot hayom in the Bigdei Lavan, including hotzat kaf u'machteh. Ve'echad bein hotzat kaf u'machteh. Then he would change again into the Bigdei Zahav, which would be the 3rd Tevilah, the 5th and 6th Kiddushin, and to do Elo ve'el ha'am b'mahen musafin v'tamid shel ben arbaim. And along with them, that's when he would do the musafin and the tamid shel ben arbaim. The fikach, Rashi continues, tzarich lafsik Elo ve'el ha'am. Yes, we have to interrupt with the 2 Elim between Avodat Hayom, the Hotzat Kaf U'Machteh, right? Between that and the Avodah of the day, right? Which is the Parvasir Chatat, and the removing of the Hotzat Kaf U'Machteh. I have to put the Elim prior to Hotzat Kaf U'Machteh. Hotzatan tafsik bein elo ve'el ha'am, the tamid shel ben ha'arbaim. And then their removal, the removal of the kafu machteh, will then interrupt between the bringing of the elim and the bringing of tamid shel ben harbai and everything that's connected with that. Hare chamesh. So now I have 5 to be low, and I added in the numbers. The numbers are 1 tamid shel shachar bivigdei zahav. 2. Now he's put it right. The second tefillah, avodat hayom bivigdei lavan. 3. This is third tefillah, and he puts on the bigdei zahav for the second time. Elo ve'el ha'am bivigdei zahav al hamizbeach hachitzon. He puts on his bigdei zahav. Wait a second. Screwing this up. Ve'el ha'am. Here we go. Ve'el ha'am bivigdei zahav al hamizbeach hachitzon. That's when he puts on bigdei zahav for the third time. I'm sorry, for the second time. He does the elim in the bigdei zahav mizbeach zahav. It's the second time in the bigdei zahav. It's his third tevilah. And then the fourth tevilah would be to put on the bigdei lavan again. Hotzat kafu machteh b'bigdei lavan. And then he would once again do a tefillah, put on the bigdei zahav, musafim v'tamid shel ben arbaim b'bigdei zahav. That's how Rashi explains that part of the sugya, and that's more or less how we explained last week, but I thought it worthwhile to see Rashi in somewhat greater detail. And also there's certain diukim in Rashi, including something that we alluded to in, I think, last week, that Rashi holds that the musafin, that the actual tamid shel ben ha'arbayim was done after the 5th tevilah. And there's a machloket between him and the Rambam about that, because the Rambam held that the korban tamid was done after he did the elim, after the 3rd tevilah. The Ramban will talk about that a little bit, but there's certain diukim here in Rashi. We don't have to go into them any deeper. So just to, right, so these were, yeah, so this was you can follow this Rashi using the charts that I sent out previously. This is number 6, Rabbi Akiva de Tosefta, according to Rashi. This is Rashi's Shita. And this is what he just explained, that the Tfilah Rishana is in Bigdei Zahav, Tfilah Shniya is Bigdei Lavan. So the first Tfilah is the Korban Tamid, second Tfilah, and what Rashi doesn't say there, because it's not immediately pertinent, he does the Korban Tamid, the Ketoret, the Neirot, but he also does the beginning of the Musaf. He does the par and the Shivat Kvasim of the Musaf. Then he would tavel the second time, the Bigdei Lavan, he would do the par and the Sir Chatat. And then he does the Tfilah Shlishit, Bigdei Zahav. And here he would do the Sir Hanaseh B'chutz and the Elim, right? Rashi has left out this question, the Sir Hanaseh B'chutz, but and why does he leave it out? Because in our immediate context, we're only really focusing on the psukim that are in Achrei Mot. And we know that we have to integrate the Parshat Tamid and Parshat Musafin. We know we have to integrate them, but that's not the purpose of the sugya here. The purpose of the sugya here is just to tell us how many tefillot, how many kiddushin, and because I have to have that number of tefillot and kiddushin, it tells me that this pasuk of Ma'aron El Moed must be out of order. That's what we want to conclude here. This question of Sir Hanaseh B'chutz is a very interesting question, which is actually the hemshech of the sugya here, but I don't think we're going to do it. Maybe we'll come back to it another time. Tefillah Shlishit be that, right? So he would do in the Tefillah Shlishit, he would do the Sir Hanaseh B'chutz, which is another, right? That's the last part of the Musaf he's going to do now, along with the Elim. And then he would do the Tefillah Revi'it, the Chutzat Kafu Machteh. He'd do the Tefillah Chamishit, which is the Keves for the Korban Tamid, and the Ktoret, and the Neirot, and so forth. That's the end. Okay. So the next part of the sugya, which is here on back on Daf Ayin Aleph, I do want to do that, but today I'm not going to continue with it. I will tell you the hemshech of the sugya on Lamed Bet is quite an interesting discussion where there are different opinions about after the Gemara just said that we have this Masoret of Chamesh Tvilot and Asara Kiddushin, then I have various Amoraim bringing proofs from the Psukim for this notion of Chamesh Tvilot and Asara Kiddushin. So that's also quite interesting, because you might say if it's Halacha L'Moshe Sinai, by definition, I don't need psukim. The whole point of the Halacha L'Moshe Sinai is that it's not in the psukim. So there's an interesting discussion later on about why that's done, but okay. And it also is an interesting analysis of the psukim. I don't think we're going to go back to do that. I do want to actually do the rest of the sugya here on Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph, and as that goes, because it does have to do with this. But for today, I'm debating about doing that. But for today, what I do want to do is I promise you we'll look at the Ramban. After all this very technical discussion, I think it will serve us now to help understand this Ramban. So a long, long time ago, when we began this whole study of Yoma, and we spent a few shiurim going through these psukim at the beginning of Acharei Mot, we saw this. Rashi told us that this pasuk Kav Gimel, was out of order, right? Just to remind us, here in pasuk Kav Gimel, Rashi says, right? Our rabbis told us that this is not the place for this pasuk. Wait, hold on a second. They gave a reason for their words in Masechet Yoma. V'amru shekol parasha kula ne'amra al seder ha'avodah chutz mibiyazu, but the entire parsha was set in the order of the service, except for this coming into the Kodesh. Shehi achar asiyat olato v'olat ha'am v'haktarat emurei par v'seir shenasin b'chutz b'bigdei zahav. This is done after he did his Olah and the Olat Ha'am. Remember, those are the Elim. And of course, after he did Haktarat Emurei Par B'Seir Shnasim B'chutz B'Bigdei Zahav. After he had also burnt the Emurim, the fats from the Sira Nasa Bifnim and the Par Nasa Bifnim, he burned those fats on the Mizbeach HaChitzon, because those were done outside, in other words, outside of the Beit Mikdash proper. while wearing the Bigdei Zahav, the Tovel, the Kadesh, the Poshtan, the Ovesh, Bigdei Lavan. And he would do those first, then he would towel and wash his hands and legs and remove the Bigdei Zahav and put on the Bigdei Lavan. So Rashi here is simply he's alerting us to how Chazal understood that this Pasuk Kav Gimel, is out of order. And he's telling us what the actual order that it would have happened. Uba el ohamored, Rashi says, Lotzi et hakafi et hamachteh. He goes in to remove the kaf hamachteh, sheiktir et haktorot lifnai v'lifnim. The kaf hamachteh that he used to burn the ktoret when he went into the Kodesh HaKodashim. Ufashat et bigdei habad, achar shehotziyah. After he removed it, or really after he removed them, and when he put on the Bigdei Zahav to do the Tamid Shel Ben Arbaim. So here Rashi is going to go through once again the order as he understands it of the Avodat Hayom. Hold on one second. So Rashi says here, essentially what we just learned in the Gemara, right? And Rashi's Perush of the Gemara, Zehu Seder HaAvodot. Tamid Shel Shachar B'Vigdei Zahav. If you want, you can follow using the chart that I can't put them both up at the same time, but right, you can also follow here, or you can look at the chart number 6. Tamid Shel Shachar B'Vigdei Zahav. V'Avodot Parvasir HaPnimiyim U'Ktoret Shel Machteh B'Vigdei Lavan. Excuse me. Right, so those are all the Avodot HaPnimiyot that he does in Bigdei Lavan. That's the second Tvila, and the first time he puts on the Bigdei Lavan. Ve'elo ve'el ha'am u'miktzat ha'musafin, and some of the musafin b'Vigdei Zahav. That's the third Tvila, the second time he puts on the Bigdei Zahav. Otzat kaf ha'machteh b'Vigdei Lavan. Removal of the kaf ha'machteh is in the Bigdei Lavan. Shiarei hamusafin v'tamid shel ben arbaim v'ktoret ha'echal shal gabei hamizbeach ha'penimi b'Vigdei Zahav. The rest of the musafin, actually Rashi here isn't going, because according to Rashi, according to Rabbi Akiva, there are no more musafin to do at this point, but according to other deot, there still would be. So in any event, he's just bringing it down here like this, that the rest of the musafim, the tamid shel ben arbaim, the ketoret ha'echal, that in other words, the ketoret that he would do every day, ben ha'arbaim, shel gabeim mizbeach pnimi, all of those things he does in the Bigdei Zahav, and that would be the fifth tefillah and the third time he's wearing the Bigdei Zahav. The seder ha'mikraot lefi ha'avodot kachu. So this is going to be similar to what Rashi explained in his Perush on Daf Lamed Bet. He's going to put the psukim in what should be their proper order according to this approach of Chazal. So what is it? The Shilachat HaSeir Bamidbar, right? So first he would send off the Sir LaAzazel. Then it would skip, that's Pasuk Kav Bet. We would skip Pasuk Kav Gimel and go to Brachat Besura B'Mayim. He would change clothes and put on the Bigdei Zahav. That's the rest of Pasuk Kaf Dalid. He would do the Elim. That's Pasuk Kaf Hey. That's the Haktarat Emurim of the Parvas Seir Hachatat. The Koha Parasha Ad Yachayavo El Machaneh, and all the rest of the Parsha until Pasuk Kavav Yacharkach Uba Aharon. Right, so Rashi here is saying a little bit more, and this is also based on a Gemara that we didn't see, but it's essentially the same thing, except that it's also including Haktarata Emurim. In other words, technically, it's not just that Pasuk Kaf Gimel should have come after Pasuk Kaf Dalet. It should have come after even after Pasuk Kaf Hey. But okay, basically the same thing that we saw. So now let's look at the Ramban. Let's finish off today by looking at the Ramban. So I'll skip the whole first part, which is the Ramban quoting the Rashi that we just saw. And the Ramban continues on to say, right? Really, this pasuk is crying out, as it were. It's telling me to darshan me. It's telling us to darshan me. Shelo yitachen b'shum panim sheyitzaveh sheyavo Aaron el moed lo davar. It can't possibly be that the Torah is telling us that Aaron should go into the Ol Moed without anything, right? He's going in empty-handed. He's not going in ostensibly to do anything. Rak lifshot sham bigadav liot arum behechal Hashem. Just to remove his clothes and to be naked in the Heichal of Hashem. Ohanicham sham l'rekavon, and to leave them there to deteriorate. Al korchenu, right? So the Ramban is saying that that's beyond, that's unacceptable. I can't read the psukim kifshutam that it's telling me now that Aaron should go in and strip naked in the Heichal and leave the Gadim there. He must be going in there to do something. Al korchenu, so it must be uba Aaron el moed la'avod avodah. That when it says Aaron goes into the Ol Moed, he must be going in there to do some kind of service. Lo hutzracha katuv lahaskira. So the Torah didn't have to actually mention specifically what the service was. Bihi hotzata kafa machteh. And that is that he's going in to remove the kafa machteh. It'll explain why he doesn't have to say it explicitly. The tam hakatuv, so the explanation of this pasuk, ki hiskir batchila, because it mentions earlier, right? So it tells us earlier that he had gone into the Kodesh HaKodeshim to bring the Ketoret, right? Before he did the other, the sprinkling of the blood, he had to go in with the Ketoret. Right, that was already mentioned much earlier in the Parsha. Right, so that's telling us there that you had to bring in the kafa machteh and put the ketoret onto the coals so that it would raise a cloud of smoke from the ketoret, and then he would go out immediately to bring in the blood of the par, etc. Right? So I understand from that pasuk, from pasuk Yud Gimel, that the kaf and the machteh are there the whole time. But of course, nonetheless, he's going to at some point have to remove them. L'kach amar, and that's why it says, Uva Aharon el Ol Moed, Lavo mi beit leparochet namashi hiniach sham. So that's how I understand. This is the Ramban. This is the Ramban's pshat about how did Chazal know that he went in to remove the kaf machteh. He says because the Torah set it up. It told me that he brought in the kaf machteh, and then he had to leave to do various other things. And now when he's coming back in, and it doesn't tell me anything specific that he's going in to do as an avodah, it stands to reason that it's because the Torah understands that he could only be going in for one thing. and that's to remove the kaf u'machteh. He goes on a little bit more about this. So here the Torah doesn't tell us everything that the Kohen did at the beginning of this, meaning at the beginning of the day, in the Bigdei Zahav, Kigon, Tamid Shachar. For example, right, that he would have done the Tamid Shachar before all of these other things. Here, Parshat Achrei just goes right into the avodah that he does in Bigdei Lavan on this day. The Sidra HaParsha Shiaseh Behem K'toret Shelifnei Lifnim. Then the order, the parsha is ordered such that it tells me that it has to do the K'toret in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, Upar V'Sir HaPnimi, and then he has to do the Parvasir Chatat to sprinkle their blood inside, the Inyana Sir HaMishtalech, and then he would have sent off the Sir HaMishtalech. The Kol Zeh Asui B'Seder Echad. This is all being done according to one order. So the only thing that's left for him to do in these begadim, in the Bigdei Lavan, is to remove the kaf u'machten. The derech haktuvim b'chol makom lashlim ha'inyan asher hitchil bo. So the Ramban says this is the way of Tanakh, that every place is the way of the Mikra in all places to finish off a subject that it began. Afal pish yesh bo k'tzat inyan mu'uchar l'mash yaskir achar ken. Even if it has some later matter that's brought in to what's being mentioned afterwards. V'lakach amar uva Aaron el moed bivgadim ha'eleh. In other words, so Ramban again, he's going to fit this in the sense that when we come to Pasuk Kaf Gimel, even though we understand that it's out of order, but we will understand when we're learning it as it's presented, that when Aaron goes in, he's going to be wearing the Bigdei Lavan. And I'll read a little bit more in the Ramban. V'Aaron el moed b'begadim ha'ela. In other words, in the Bigdei Lavan, v'hashlim avodotav b'hem, to finish off the services that he's doing, that he does with them. V'hi hotzata kaf ha'machten shu tzarich lahotziam misham. And what does it mean to finish off? It's to remove the kaf ha'machten that he has to remove from there. So, to explain this a little bit further, once again, if I read the psukim kifshutam, he, at the beginning of this parsha, Achrei Mot, he put on the Bigdei Lavan, right? So we understand that he did the Bigdei Zahav earlier to do the Korban Tamid, etc. Then he put on the Bigdei Lavan. He does all these avodot. And we understand from the context of the Parsha that the idea of wearing the Bigdei Lavan is those are the Begadim he needs to wear in order to go into the Kodesh HaKodeshim. And so when I come to Pasuk Kaf Gimel, V'Aaron el moed fashat Bigdei Habad, he goes in and it says so I understand that at the beginning of that pasuk, he's still wearing the Bigdei Lavan, right? Because he doesn't change his clothes. Shutosh Mikra, he doesn't change them until the next pasuk. So and why is he going in? So the Ramban is saying like this: he's going in to remove kaf u'machten. How do I know that he's going in to remove kaf u'machten? Because earlier in Pasuk Yud Gimel, he had to bring in the kaf u'machten. This whole time, he's wearing the Bigdei Lavan. The only reason he has to wear Bigdei Lavan, as it were, is so that he can go into the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So when I come to Pasuk Kaf Gimel, I understand it says he's going into the Olam Moed, which is the Hechal, but I understand it must be that he's actually going all the way into the Kodesh HaKodeshim, because otherwise he wouldn't be still wearing the Bigdei Lavan. And why would he go in if not to finish off what he started? And what does it mean to finish off what he started? To remove the Kaf U'Machten. That's how the Ramban is understanding in his own quite expert way. He was trying to take as much proof from the psukim as we have them to understand this mahalach of Chazal. So let's go do a little bit more. Ufashat acharei tzeito et bigadav asher lavash baboker be'eit bo'oel kodesh. And so then afterwards, after he leaves, he's going to remove the clothes that he wore in the morning when he came into the kodesh. He's going to leave them there in the place that he removes them. What does it mean to leave them there? It's not to point to a geographic spot that inside of the Olam Moed he has to strip and leave them. To leave them there means they have to be left for this purpose. They're being left there in time, that they're going to be left as having been used for this Yom Kippur, and they can no longer be used for another Yom Kippur. And you may remember we saw there are dayot that they could be used for other things, but they can't be used by the Kohen Gadol again for the next Yom Kippur. And that's the idea of Hinicham Sham. The Sham there doesn't mean, according to this, the location. It means they have to be left there in time. That's the end of their time. So at that point, that's the end of the avodot that are going to be done in the Bigdei Lavan for that day, according to this one order. And then it goes and says in Pasuk Kaf Dalet, Brachatzit b'saro b'mayim v'lavashit b'gadav. Then it says, right, he goes to the mikvah and he puts on his clothes. What is his clothes? Hayeduim lo, the ones that are known for him. Shebahem yavod kol hashana. What Rashi said in his Perush on Yoma, b'gadav shmone, like his 8 begadim. And that is the source for telling me that he has to towel in between clothing changes. V'yamar, and then it says v'yatzav yasat olato. He goes out, he does the olato v'yatolatam, he does the elim. Kikol ha'naseh kodem lazeh b'vigdei halavan, hakol maseh pnim, because everything that was done until now, everything was done before now, was done in the Bigdei Lavan. Those are all the things that were done inside the Kodesh HaKodeshim, inside the Kodesh. Ve'elo ve'el ha'am shi'azkir heim nasim al mizbeach hachitzon. Right? The Elim are going to be done on the outer mizbeach, on the mizbeach HaNechoshet. Hinei hizkira parsha halavisha harishona shel Bigdei Halavan v'hitzrich bat tvila. Right, this is, we said much earlier, Pasuk Dalid, that he had to do a tefillah. That's up here, Pasuk Dalid. Kton by Kodesh Yilbash, Miknasei ban yu al b'sarov, Abnei ban Yaakov, B'tzefer ban Yuna, B'gdei Kodeshem, Rachatz b'mayim et b'saro u've'sham. Right, the Torah told us before he put on the Bigdei Lavan for the first time, he had to go to the mikvah. And now, here again, in Pasuk Kaf Dalet, it's telling me that he had to go to the mikvah when he removed the Bigdei Lavan and put on the Bigdei Zahav. Here, so the Torah told us the first time he puts on the Bigdei Lavan, Pasuk Dalet, he has to go to the mikvah. And here now it's telling us the last time he's going to take them off, and it also required going to the mikvah. So we learned from this, this is the basis for Chazal understanding that he had to toggle in between each change of clothes. Yaldat Rabbeinu Shlomo tiyah tefillah azot shel hotzaat kaf u'machteh acharei elo ve'el ha'am. Actually, I'm going to stop here. I would like to do this last part, and but it took me longer than I thought to get up here. And maybe we'll do this next time. But I would like to do it if you have time. Look at this yourself. It's the end of the Ramban here on Pasuk Chaf Gimel, and this is where the Ramban gets into some detail about these specifics of the order and the machloka between Rashi and other deot about the specific order. So this gets quite detailed. Maybe I'll do it. Maybe I won't. I encourage you all to do it. Yes.
I understand that the Ramban, also Rashi, they explain in great detail that the place where the pasuk is, that the pasuk is not in it's out of order.
Right.
But this is the Mesorah. It's a canonical text. You can't touch it. So, and they don't explain why they can allow it themselves to put it somewhere else. This is the question. It doesn't make sense where it is. They explain why it doesn't make sense, and they try to find another sense. And they explain where it should be. But on the other hand, are you allowed to do that?
So I would phrase this question a little bit differently, because this is what I see. What I see is not that, in other words, it's not that Chazal said we're changing the text of the Torah. What they're saying is we see the text of the Torah. We're not going to change the text. We're not going to, cut the pasuk Kaf Gimel and put it after pasuk Kaf Daled. What they're saying is we're leaving the text exactly as it is, but we're going to tell you this, that you have to understand it differently than the way it's written. So this raises different questions. One way of phrasing the question is,
well, but then you could mix up all the Torah. I don't know. I know there is not no mukdam v'no en mukdam ve'en mucha b'Torah, but on the other hand, I know there are also. Yes, but nevertheless, if you if you allow yourself to do such a thing, you could change all kinds of text and get another sipur to build up another sipur.
Okay, so another way of asking this question is, I'm going to ask it a slightly different way. I'll say, Bo Nagid that it was just this one place that Chazal, because they had certain Kabbalot, they had to understand that the text is telling us this particular Seder HaAvodah out of order. That raises the question, Bo Nagid, so why did the Torah present it to us out of order? In other words, my approach is a little bit different than the approach of your question. It's not that there's something wrong with your question. I'm approaching it from the point of view from what I believe would be Chazal's point of view. Chazal understood, this is like obvious from the Gemara, Zemuskam ben kol ha-Tanaim va'amoraim, that this one pasuk, Kivyachol, is out of order. Okay, but why did the Torah present it to us out of order? That's the question. So, in terms of the way you phrase the question, I would say this, that here, this doesn't set a precedent to give us license to change psukim willy-nilly. Because as we saw from the Gemara, as we saw also in some depth from both Rashi and the Ramban, there has to be other strong evidence, even overwhelming evidence, that tells us that this is out of order. In our case, the thing that apparently pushes us to say that it's out of order is because I have a specific halacha Moshe Sinai that on that day the Kohen Gadol had to do chamesh tevilot. If I don't change something in the order, I'm only going to end up with 3 tevilot. So that's the basis essentially for this whole changing of the order, the idea that it's out of order. But again, as I said, it still leaves the question, okay, is that kol tov yafeh? But why did the Torah not just tell me the right order? Why did it go out of its way? Why didn't it go out of its way to tell me the right order? And beinatayim, we haven't seen a strong answer to that. I think what you see in the Ramban that we've done so far, the Ramban is giving us the beginning of what might be an answer to that question. But it's still very difficult. The Ramban's beginning of this answer is, I need to see that this is how I understand the Ramban, that the Ramban is going to say the reason the Torah didn't tell me that he does the Elim in the middle before he does the Hotzat Kaf U'Machteh is because I want to understand that from a certain point of view, the avodot that he does in the Bigdei Lavan are really all one. And so the Torah didn't want to interrupt from the time he put on the Bigdei Lavan till the time he removes them to tell me anything else. Because what he does at the end, Hotzat Kaf U'Machteh, that's really at one with the beginning, with everything else he did in the Bigdei Lavan. As I say, it's the beginning of an answer. It's not a full answer, but we see then the way it's presented in Parshat Acharei Mot that all of the avodot that he does in the Bigdei Lavan are essentially all one. They're all one whole. But nonetheless, because we have Kabbalah, we understand that in fact there is an interruption between them. But when he puts on the Bigdei Lavan for the second time, it is simply to complete the Avodah that he began in the Bigdei Lavan earlier. This doesn't answer your question, Paul. And as I say, I would approach the question differently, because I'm just maybe reiterating what I just said. I don't think that we would learn from this sugya that we have license to change the order of psukim anywhere else, because here we have specific proofs and indications that we have to understand this out of order. But that still leaves my question, which is, but why didn't the Torah just present it to us like that to begin with? In other places where the Torah is, where the order of the Torah, let's say, is not clear, I can argue about the order. But here, and we do have these arguments, right? We have these machlokas in Rishonim about different parts of the Torah, about their order. What's interesting here is that, and maybe I'm going to bring this subject to a close for now, about this whole question of the order. There's something very compelling to Chazal about the order of the Avodah on Yom Kippurim, right? So much so that I had to make 7 charts to show the different dayot, and I didn't even actually make all the permutations, because there are other permutations. If you add in the machloka between Chachamim and Rabbi Meir about the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, I'd have to make 2 more charts for each one. But so it comes back to a question that we asked a long time ago. We have now spent really a lot of time and energy trying to understand what the order was according to these different deot. And it leaves us with this question, why was the order so important? Why was this order so important? And it's a question I'm going to have to leave again for now, also because it's late. And also, I don't claim to have an answer to that, except to say, I think this would require another set of shiurim, where what we would need to do, in order to, at least one way of approaching the answer to that question is, we need to break down on the list of things that he's doing, what we understand, even just in basic pshat. What are we accomplishing? What are we accomplishing? What is the Kohen Gadol accomplishing when he does the tamid, when he does the various musafim, and when he does the various avodot hayom? What is being accomplished? And if I understand what is being accomplished, then I can make a conceptual argument for why one should come before another. And the hint that we got to that, to this approach, is from Parshat Achrei Mot itself, because he has to first bring the Par HaKohen before he brings the Seir Chatat of the Av. We said, why does he do that? Because first, he needs to have kapara for himself and for the Kohanim before he can then be an agent to bring kapara for the whole Ab. So that order, that part, that internal part of the order, that seems obvious. In other words, that seems to be mukhrach, that if he did, and actually we saw it in the Mishnah also, if he does the sprinkling of the seir before the sprinkling of the par, it's pasul. You'd have to go back and start again, because he needs that kapara. The kapara of the kohanim needs to precede the kapara of the am. That part it seems to be clear. How does that fit in with all the rest? So I think zetzarich. I would then have to go back and look. What am I accomplishing with each other korban? What's the purpose of the elim? Why are they being brought? And as it gets more complex, I'd have to add in the musafin. And why are the musafin? Why are those the particular musafin? And why are they broken up into different parts of the day? Bein l'Rebbe Yeez or Bein l'Rebbe Akiva, right? Everybody breaks them up and puts them in different parts of the day. So once if I would do that, then I might have an approach to this whole question. But I do understand, my assumption is that would be a worthwhile pursuit, because I see Chazal are very concerned about this order. So it must be there for a reason. That would be my assumption. So I think for the time being, because we have spent so long on this, and I hope that it's clearer now than when we began. I think next week, either, God willing, next week I'll be back in Israel. Either we will continue on, or I'm thinking maybe next week, and if we're still meeting the following week, which will be the Wednesday before Pesach, I thought maybe we might take a little detour and do something about Pesach. Possibly for the next two shiurim, I kind of start to prepare something, and then after Pesach, upon reflection, I think we're going to. After Pesach, I think we'll continue on in the Mishnah in Perek Shvi'i and finish off the Mishnah. After which, I would like to do one or two sugyot, including exactly the placement of the Kohen Gadol in Kodesh HaKodeshim. I think that's worthwhile to understand, and possibly also to revisit at least one other issue that came up earlier about the geography of the Beit HaMoked. maybe we'll do that as well. But mainly, I think I want to do the thing with the Kodesh HaKodashim, and then we'll start Perek Shmini. And so that might be, I don't know, that might be, I guess, sometime in June, God willing. But then I'm planning to do Perek Shmini more like we've done the last part of this Perek Shvi'i. That is, I want to focus on the Mishnah, but I'm going to also want to do selected sugyot in the Gemara. And I'm going to make an effort to try to prepare them in such a way that we finish Perek Shmini before Yom Kippur. Bezrat Hashem. Okay, so that's it for now.
נסיעה טובה.
תודה רבה. בעזרת השם.
יישר כוח.
בעזרת השם שלא יסגרו לי את שדה התעופה עד שאני מגיע. לא, אי אפשר לדעת. But I think I'm okay, even though now there's a new variant, right? But I don't think they're going to do anything too drastic. All right.
God forbid.
God forbid. God forbid. All right. Kol tov. Yitrot. Bye bye.